for
Yeah.
it.
How did you get into rowing initially?
Well, I mean, the main thing was I wasn't really very good at anything
Mm.
else, and I tried everything else, and so rowing was another thing to try. A lot of my friends were going to try rowing, so I thought, oh, I'll give it a go
Yeah.
as well. Funny story actually is I got so I don't know how it works at KGS now, but before you basically there wasn't like infinite capacity for rowing, so you got to do a trial term, and then they basically cut people who they thought they were who weren't going to be any good, and went on with a certain group of people.
Mm.
And I actually got cut in that first term. After that first term, they said, "Oh, you're not going to be any good. Like you just don't bother."
Yeah.
And so I'm still not really sure what happened. I think there were a few people who wanted to actually carry on with it, even though they weren't technically allowed to, and I got kind of snuck back in to be allowed to train. And I kind of got ignored for maybe a year
Yeah.
after that. Just basically, there were like a group of us who were initially cut but wanted to come back, and we just got put in this boat that and just kind of messed about on our own for basically a whole year. And then after that J14 year, I trained over the summer and came back and kind of
Mm.
yeah got someone to take. I guess I think is it Andy Beard
I
still
think
there?
he still teaches at school. It's
Okay.
yeah, he does some rowing, but we have
Because
yeah.
he was the J15 coach
Mm.
then, and then finally sort of I guess took notice, but it took quite a while.
That could have been it. You could have just stopped, and that would have been that. We've done it forever.
Exactly. It could have just been stopped. It could have stopped there. I don't know what I would have done, to be honest.
Yeah. So we're in our J16 year right now. It's kind of like a kind of weird point. We kind of had all the
Yep.
academics and stuff, but then I've been asked to kind of talk about kind of what was the significance of your J16 year, because I think you've already talked about it a bit. But then it's about kind of whether to continue or kind of how that worked for you in that at that point.
Yeah. Well, by J16 year, I was already pretty
Mm.
committed. I basically borderline obsessive, to be honest, by then. And there was a good group of us that were just really into it. But it was an interesting year because we were quite strong at J15,
Mm.
and I think as a group, perhaps we were maybe a little bit overconfident going into J16, and it was a lot hard. It just gets progressively more difficult.
Mm.
If you're at J14, if you just do a few sessions, or if you're bigger than average, you can do quite well. J15, the demand is greater, but if you're just part of a group that has like grown earlier, you've got a much better chance. But by J16, people have caught up. Some people are training really hard. Some people are just freakishly good by 16. So it's much harder. And then I mean, I don't know how it works now, but then we were training with the sixth form
Mm.
guys then at J16. So it was just the whole thing was just a lot harder, and it was a bit of a wake up
Mm.
call in a sense because we realized we had to train a lot harder to actually be any good.
It's crazy. It's basically the same. Everything you said, it's like
So
exactly the same
really,
thing. Um,
yeah, I mean things don't. It doesn't change. There's no. Yeah, it's just the same stuff.
yeah. Oh, so you're saying, yeah, Karen.
Um, yeah, and I think also maybe for me personally, I didn't. I thought I kind of broken into like a good the top kind of group of guys in the year group, but I wasn't quite there. So J16 was a little bit disappointing for me because I think I didn't get into the top four, and that top four went on and did really well, and the eight that we were in didn't.
Mm.
We kind of underperformed, but the top four guys did very well. And so for me, it was like a little bit of a disappointing year in the sense that I felt like I trained just as hard as anyone else, but I just wasn't at the level that you needed to be um, within the group or just generally. So I was like, it wasn't an easy year,
Mm.
um, but I mean, you just got on with
Yeah.
it really.
What do you think it was at that point? Was it more like a technique thing, or was it still to an extent kind of just being bigger, or just how it worked?
Bit of everything, just wasn't that skilled, wasn't quite strong, wasn't quite fit enough. Just a bit of it's like I think rowing is it's tricky, but yeah, just slightly not good enough technically, slightly not good
Yeah.
enough, slightly not strong enough. Just couldn't quite put it together. I think I switched sides as well, J16 year. So I started on stroke side and moved to bow side, and that was just like I just couldn't put it. It just wasn't going as quickly as I wasn't going as quickly as I should have done, or I thought I could do. So I think rowing's frustrating a bit like that because on the one hand you feel like it's just a sport where you just grind. All you do is you just put in the miles. But it's a little bit more subtle than that in reality.
Yeah, I think it's kind of weird when you think that kind of comparing yourself to someone else and thinking, is there really that much of a gap between me and them? Are they really vastly better? Is it just small things that they're doing that I'm not? Or it's not as big a difference as people think normally. But I think.
Yeah, crew selection is it's always tricky at the margin. I think what you want to do is just be so good that they can't ever leave you out of the crew. Like you want to be in that top, you want to be one of the top few picks, and then it's an easy choice. But at the margin, it's just really hard. People can be interchangeable, and you just have to, the coach just has to pick the person who they think deserves to be in the boat more, because fundamentally they're both, often there's two people that can make the boat go just as fast. However, in my case, it probably wasn't true at J16 level. Yeah, I wasn't in that top four. That was probably the right decision.
But okay, so after J16, kind of what happened after that? Kind of how did that change? I guess.
What happened at J16? So another funny story. So after J16, I kind of applied. So I'm Welsh, or my mum's Welsh, so I applied to row for Wales. Like there was sort of a kind of training camp that you could go to row at home countries, and after J16, I applied for that, and they invited me to train, and I kind of thought that it was like, well, when I went there, it sort of was presented like, oh yeah, you're kind of on the team. And so I went for this like training camp in Wales. It was good fun, and I was in the 8, and it was sort of going well. And then like on the last day of the training camp, I just got binned and sent home. It was like one of two guys. They basically binned two guys, and I was just so annoyed. So it was another like very frustrating. It was just the end of an extremely frustrating year.
Was it like a week-long camp? Like
it was two. I think it was 2 weeks. Yeah, so I spent 2 weeks training there, and there wasn't really any like. Yeah, we trained quite hard, but they didn't really do any selection. But the coach just basically like, I don't know. He just sort of eyeballed the crew and then just decided, we'll just get rid of this guy. And there was one other guy they got rid of as well. So yeah, that year J16 was super frustrating for me. I mean, I can't really. Looking back on it, actually, yeah, it was kind of infuriating. But I don't know. I mean, it's weird. At the time, it just didn't seem like a decision to just. It just seemed like obvious that I would just keep going. But yeah, looking back on it, it was like quite demoralizing.
Yeah. I suppose there's a lot of stuff that like could have kind of held you back with it, but like you still carried on, did really well. So what happened after that? J17 and beyond.
But I think one of the things that was motivating was, I mean, when you're that age, almost every this is what I felt, and I don't know whether it's like for everyone, but when you're that age and you're still developing, pretty much every time you step on a row machine or you do a training session, you kind of improve.
Yeah. So
it was just, I look at that and think, well, look, I'm just getting better every day. So it doesn't really, it's quite easy to play the long game. When you're maybe older or when you're closer to like your actual potential, when you're really close to when you're training, like the way we were training at Oxford, where it's like you're training twice a day, every single day, and you're just exhausted. It's quite hard to sort of produce like a top performance every single day. That can be quite draining. Whereas at school, I felt like almost every single week, you just get a little bit better, and it was very not easy, but there was quite a clear relationship between like the effort that you put in and the improvements that you made. And so that always just kept me kind of just pushing on, basically.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of,
I don't know whether everyone experiences that, but maybe it's just a function of just growing. As you're growing up, you're just getting your capacity is just building the whole time.
I think one of our questions we were asking people was kind of like, why do you row, on like a broader question. But one thing that kind of came up quite a lot was kind of those small improvements that kind of build towards something greater, and how even if kind of small improvement doesn't seem like it's kind of something massive, kind of it does build up to kind of milestones, and that does really kind of motivate you, I guess.
Oh, definitely. Everything. I mean, I don't like to compare rowing too much to life in general, but this is one aspect where I think it's a good lesson for life. Is that basically everything that anyone has ever done, they've done it incrementally. Like everything that has ever been achieved happened very, very slowly over a very long period of time in very small increments. And you definitely get that from rowing. I wouldn't say that was why I rowed. It was kind of, I just got into it, and it became like a bit of, it just became like an obsession and something very, that I was just really passionate about, and I enjoyed the process, and just, it was just part of who I was. But so from that perspective, it was quite hard it would have been totally unnatural to stop at any point. But yeah.
So, kind of over the years after J16, kind of moving on to kind of uni and kind of Oxford and everything, kind of how did that kind of work? I know your story with it.
So what happened there? First of all, we had there was some good rowing at school. The J17 year was another kind of quite anticlimactic year for us, like for our group, and also for me. I thought I could like have a good shot at like the GB trials and everything like that, but didn't really. I just wasn't really good enough then. I went back to the Wales team after J17, and we did pretty well. We won national championships. I think we came second in the game. We lost to Ireland in the 4. That was pretty good, but it didn't feel like a stellar success at the time. It felt like there was more to come. But then in the J18 year, I think as a crew and then also individually, I think we all did pretty well. Like we won the sort of first states then, and we had a very good crew. We trained really hard. That was a very satisfying year, for sure.
That's good. So I think I talk about the boat race and kind of Oxford and everything. What kind of training did you do to kind of leading up to the boat race, kind of the first time? Kind of how did that work?
Yeah. So when I first went, the first time I rowed with the sort of the Oxford squad, the proper university squad, was actually in my second year. My first year at Oxford, I wasn't sure if I was going to row, just because I didn't really know whether I could do it with the degree. I thought, arriving there, I thought, you have to take the degree super seriously, and it would be. And also, I just didn't really back myself to go. You watch the boat race, especially in 2000 from 2005 to 2008, or 2009. The boat race crews they just seemed ridiculously good, and on like a completely other level. Just completely another level from where I was at. So I thought, I'm not really sure I'm going to go in for that on day one. Then after a month, I think, of being there and not rowing, I got quite frustrated and just started training again on my own. I spent that whole first year. I rowed a little bit with the college. So in Oxford, there's quite a big like inter-college rowing.
Hmm.
So Oxford split up into colleges, and they all compete against each other. And the standard is very variable, but there's huge participation in it. So some colleges will have like 4 crews, and the top crew will train quite hard, and then they'll have just people who just turn up on the day and race. So I just got involved. I got involved in that, which was a little bit frustrating because the standard is definitely below school rowing. But I was just basically just trained on my own.
Yeah.
I just kind of thought I just basically I just patched together the school program essentially and just did that, maybe slightly more volume for a whole year. And then I joined like a development squad in the summer, and managed, and then I just turned up in September and started training with the team, and I mean, yeah, and then we just went from there basically.
One thing, this isn't on the question list, a bit of a curveball here. But
Yeah, go for it.
do you find that training with a team and being able to kind of work with other people in your kind of in your exercise and kind of doing scores kind of is beneficial to kind of getting the best out of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think in general, absolutely. But sometimes to make like a physical step forward, like a purely physiological step forward, as in, just getting your numbers where they need to be, like your ERG scores, your strength, your fitness, there's a benefit to sometimes doing that on your own, because sometimes what you need to do isn't what's being prescribed. So if you just want to get better, if your block is, you just need to get your 2K down, or it might not be that doing the team training is going to get you to that kind of, with that one focus in mind. Obviously being part of a team as a whole is just to get you faster at rowing, full stop, in the crew. That's exactly what you need to be doing. But sometimes, like, let's say, if you're very strong in terms of sprinting and not very strong at long distance, and so your aerobic fitness is lacking, you need to spend as much time on the ergo as you possibly can. And that might not mesh with what the team is doing. So sometimes it can help you make a physical step forward, but on the whole, being part of a team will get you way further. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I can come back to the kind of boat race and kind of in the squad once you were kind of there. Kind of what kind of training did you do?
Okay, so
and
yeah. So well, it's interesting. So it's quite a kind of funny, I don't know, scenario. Or it kind of plays. So basically, on the first day, you turn up, and a few people the coach makes a speech and the president makes a speech, and there's a real sort of motley crew of people who turn up, and everyone's kind of eyeing each other and sort of trying to sort of see who are the big dogs, like who's, it's quite entertaining from that perspective. But then basically within a day or two, you jump on an erg test, and it's either a 2K or a 5K depending on what the coach will feel like, and then it's really clear. So after that, it's interesting because you see some people who you think they look really athletic, and you think, they're going to really just like destroy this. And actually they, some people just pull dreadful scores, and then other guys you think you never even knew about, they'll do really well, they're suddenly in the running. So it's quite an interesting sort of first week. And then after that, you basically just settle into a rhythm of ergos every morning, rowing every afternoon, 6 days a week. And then at the weekend, you just go, you do two water sessions. And it's pretty consistent, to be honest. There's not much for 6 or 7 months, from basically beginning of September until the boat race. That is your routine, almost without exception. You might have one weight session in there, but there's basically ergos, rowing every day. Yeah.
So that was ergs in the morning, and then a water session, or was that 2 water sessions?
Yeah. So you go. Yeah. So you turn up at 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. You'll erg for maybe, or depending on, most of the time it's something around it's like a 70-minute session, but with sort of blocks, depending on what we're trying to achieve. So if it's early in the season, trying to build your aerobic fitness, it's just going to be 70, keeping your heart rate at your kind of target. Sometimes we'll throw in, there'll be some sort of intervals, but for the most part, it's just long grinding ergos. And then the afternoon, 1 o'clock, 1:30, you meet, drive to Wallingford, and then row, until, do like a 2-hour row session. Sometimes there'll be a technique focus. Other times you just grind out 20K on the water and you just do it again and again and again.
Yeah. It's pretty mad. Like,
it's good. I mean, it's good. To be honest, that program, I don't know whether you heard much about the Oxford coach, but Sean Bowden, he really knows his stuff. That program's been honed for kind of almost 20 years now, basically. It works pretty well. And yeah, fundamentally, like, that's how you get better at rowing. It's just put in the time.
I think we do similar things, but obviously just not as regularly. We do kind of morning sessions and kind of 2-hour sessions, but just not kind of every day, I suppose. But I suppose I'll kind of work up to that eventually.
Well, you can't. You can't. You can push kind of adults harder. It's just how it is. You've got to be careful when you're younger. Injuries are even a problem. They were even a problem at Oxford for people. So, when you're younger as well, you really don't want to take the risk with injuries and doing too much.
Yeah.
And school was actually a bit more demand in some sense as well. School, there's more. You have more. There are more lessons, so there's you have. There are fewer degrees of freedom there, whereas we can just it was a little bit of a stretch to do that. You had to sort of work around it a little bit, but fundamentally, you can just take every afternoon to row and just do your lectures and do all your work around that.
I think my dad was saying about you doing a physics degree, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, I did physics.
Cool. I think I assume it's very intensive, but.
Yeah, it was certainly. It was quite hard work, to be honest. Particularly juggling it with rowing wasn't really compatible, to be honest. There are some courses that are very compatible with rowing. Physics really isn't one of them. I had to kind of move around my lab times or just skip labs, which caused a little bit of havoc. But you just had to make it work.
One personal question, just generally, how does weights work? Kind of fit into kind of stuff you're doing, kind of all the way through, I suppose.
I always really liked weights, so it's a little bit different. I still love weights. Like, it's just I think it's one of those things that some people find, develop an affinity for, and other people don't. I think weight training is so important. It's just like, I think it's so many people just like miss out on weight training. I think it's really important. And I think well, are you talking about what kind of program I'd recommend,
just how did weights fit into the training?
At Oxford or at school? Or?
Kind of Oxford would be interesting as well, but school as well. But
yeah. So Oxford, I think historically they didn't have much of an emphasis on weights, but then I think when I was there, I think they kind of restarted it. So we would do weights once a week, which, to be honest, arguably wasn't quite enough, but at the same time it would be hard to do any more because you've only got 7 months, so you can't really get stronger you can't get meaningfully stronger in that time. I think if you really want to do weights, you want to do it in the off season, when you can kind of put a focus on them and pack on muscle. But at Oxford, look, it was kind of like a sort of normal strength based weights program. You get in some squatting, or if you weren't that comfortable squatting, we do leg press, bench pull, bench press, a lot of core, a lot of kind of stability stuff, and some sprints on the ergo. It wasn't super structured. People would try and work on their like weaknesses, but it's definitely very important. And at school as well, well, I mean, we really loved doing weights at school in my year, like in my year group. I mean, we really, and we started doing them, I think, at J15. And I think I mean, maybe it was just us because we're a little bit odd, but I always remember enjoying like weights immensely. I think we almost started, I think we ended up doing two weight sessions a week, which was really, yeah, it was very satisfying to be honest.
I think because of lockdown and everything, I can do ergs and I've got a 15 kilo weight down there, but like I can
Oh,
kind of do
nice.
kind of weight circuits, but no deadlifts or anything because I don't have the equipment. But
Yeah,
that's like the one thing I really miss. Like that's what I'm gonna be doing in September.
yeah.
But yeah,
Have you got bands? You should try and get some elastic bands if you can,
yeah,
because you can do quite a lot of workouts with those. Yeah, I mean that's one of the things now. I'm kind of fortunate enough to have. I've built like a home gym,
mm,
so for the lockdown, it just like it was great because I was just sort of locked up with my
yeah,
gym right there, so it wasn't an
yeah.
issue.
I think it's just getting a balance of stuff because if you were to do lots of weights
Yeah.
but not as many ergs, it's just doing both to kind of build up the
Yeah.
muscle. But yeah,
Also, you can whack. Look, you can put the erg on level 10 and do power. I mean, that's
yeah,
weights.
basically,
Do legs only, arms only. I mean, at level 10, I mean that you could. That's equivalent. You're getting the
yeah.
benefits if you do that. If you're feeling like you're missing it, I would definitely think about doing that.
Yeah. What was I going to do? The actual boat race itself, because that's kind of a really unique experience. Kind of, what was that like?
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago now. Yeah, it was. I mean, look, it was intense. It's like there's not many days, or there are many kind of similar experiences where everything is just on one. You have one chance. You feel like you only have one chance. Even though I rode twice, every boat race feels like this is it. Um, and that's quite sort of, yeah, that was quite intense. It's really exciting. Like the whole thing, you basically move down to London for 2 weeks, and you sort of build up to it, and you're doing all this, like, you're practicing your starts, and you're seeing them like lay out all the TV screens and all the signs and everything, and the whole thing is just this like really kind of exciting. The whole thing is just really exciting because you've seen it on TV. You know exactly what it's going to be like. You know that people are watching. Um, yeah, it's just really exciting, and the stakes feel really high. You've put a lot of time into it, and it's not just that. All your teammates have put their time into it, and then the Oxford coaching team is like, it's big. There's a head coach, assistant coach, there's administrators, there's people that help you, there's physios, team doctor. Everybody is really. There's a lot of people who feel like they're invested in what you've been doing as well, and they've been getting up early, they've been traveling around, they've gone with you on training camp, and I mean, obviously it's like that at school as well, but it feels like all these people have invested all that time and energy just for that one day, like 120, 20, less than 20 minutes. Um, so there's a lot of it builds up to a lot of pressure, that's for sure.
Mm. Because it's fantastic to watch. Kind of, it's just kind of a surreal experience. But I can't imagine kind of being there. But the actual,
It's very loud.
yeah,
The start is extremely loud. Like, I mean, but then it's very, very loud for the start, and then as soon as you clear um, Fulham Football Club, it gets very quiet, and then it's just like you're just rowing a normal race,
yeah,
which is strange. And then it starts getting deafeningly loud again. But by then you kind of zoned out a little bit. But it's yeah, that's quite a sort of weird dynamic.
yeah. So, and I know the kind of that boat race especially, but like kind of yeah, you didn't win that one. That was fine. But Moving on from that, kind of moving on from that.
No, no, no.
Um,
No, you can talk
yeah,
about it.
I'm
It's
just like,
fine.
because someone watching this might not know that, or they don't know you. So, but
Yeah.
moving on from that, you kind of going back to the boat race as the captain. Kind of, how did that change the dynamic with it?
Yeah, I was certainly that year was harder in a lot of ways. The year before, I'd just come in. It was just basically a whole. It was the year before was kind of this roller coaster where I felt extremely lucky to just even be part of the team, and then I got pretty lucky to like get into the crew at the last minute, and it all just felt kind of like being swept along in this crazy process where I wasn't really in control, which in retrospect was, I don't know, maybe contributed to us underperforming because, basically there was a group of 8 guys who trained as the crew the whole, basically from day one. And I wasn't in that group for most of the year. And then I kind of got into the crew quite late in the day where basically, well, there were a few things happened. One guy got injured, so I subbed in, and then another guy basically just didn't really perform physically, and he'd been given the benefit of the doubt, many times. And so the guy who was injured came back, and then I stayed in as well. So it was a weird dynamic from that perspective because I hadn't been part of that crew at all, and I just felt, and it was quite a kind of, it was quite a, how do you put it? There were 3 guys who'd been to the Olympics there. There was some big characters in there, and I was just, I just turned 20. I felt like just a kid kind of being swept along with that whole thing. But then the next year, none of those guys came back. I was left in charge, and there wasn't just this whole sensation of, oh well, it's great to be part of this. There was, it changed instantly to, okay, you have to have a positive impact on this and get this team to win, which is, is very, very different. And so there was a lot more pressure. Every day, I felt like I had to set an example in terms of, how I approach training. There was like, you had to help organize things. Yeah, it was just the second year was a lot harder, but then a lot more satisfying because we had an amazing crew that was like completely on the same page, and we, and in the end we performed really, really well. And unsurprisingly, I'm still really close to those guys. We had the crew Skype call last week. Wow. Whereas, unfortunately, the guys from 2010, it's just not, there just isn't the same relationship there because we weren't as close when we were rowing together and we didn't win. So it's harder to kind of stay in touch.
I suppose that's kind of testament to kind of your position as a captain, I suppose, that kind of the group both won and was able to bond enough to kind of stay in touch after, I suppose.
Oh, I can't really take all the credit. It was a very different bunch of guys. We were much younger, much less experienced group. And so that meant it was just easier for everybody to just buy into the program. The year before, if you have people coming from, who've had success elsewhere, they have really strong ideas. It's very hard for them to sort of accept maybe a slightly different way of doing things. Whereas if you've got people coming in who just aren't as experienced, it's just easier to work. Sometimes it's just easier to work with people like that. And we set the tone quite early on that like this is how we were going to do it. We weren't going to really tolerate any kind of egos. We were just going to get on with training. We weren't going to gossip about Cambridge. We weren't going to talk about anything else. We were just going to focus on what we were doing. I think that works just generally, and that worked in 2011 absolutely.
Yeah. So that after your success in the kind of the second boat race, where you're captain, kind of what has your life been like since the boat race, and how do you think rowing has affected you?
That's interesting. I mean, certainly Yeah, certainly immediately after rowing, after the boat race was quite tricky because I didn't. I basically I'd already said to my well, I almost kind of said to myself, "Well, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. I'm pretty much after this. There's other things I want to do." So I didn't really row seriously again after that boat race,
Mm.
um, which and it was quite difficult to sort of to find something. It was quite tricky to find something else after that. That's for sure. Um, so I mean, I thought basically my fourth year of my degree, my third year when I was president, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't do a huge amount of work, so I felt like I had to do a lot of catching up in the fourth year. And I had tutors in the college who basically they basically said, "Oh, you shouldn't really do rowing this year." Um, so I didn't. So I basically, yeah, I didn't really row. I rowed for the college. I kind of messed around a bit. I didn't. I was quite unfocused. I think rowing, it definitely, well, at least at that level as well. I mean, it gave my day to day such a focus, and when it was gone, it was pretty difficult to sort of latch on to something else. But since then, things have things have turned out pretty well, I guess. I've got a young family now, wife and an 11-month-old daughter,
Mm.
which is brilliant. I moved out to Switzerland in 2013,
Yeah.
um, and that's been amazing. Yeah, I mean things have been pretty good. I mean, one thing I will say is, obviously people like to say that rowing is very like applicable to the real world, and in some ways that's true, but in other ways it's been quite hard to adjust. For example, one of the examples I give is that I was fortunate to have really great coaches through my rowing career. Obviously at Oxford, Sean Bowden, but then at school we had Colin Greenaway, Andy Beard, just like really solid coaches that you could look up to, not just for rowing, but just generally. You could ask them things about anything, and you get a good answer. Now, in like the working world, for example, you don't have a coach when you go to your first job. Your boss is not a coach. They're not really that invested in your performance, um, and that's quite tricky. Um, that's quite tricky to deal with. Sort of not having like a mentor and someone who really it's their job to sort of get the best out of you. That's certainly been like a tricky adjustment over the last 10 years since I haven't been rowing.
Mm. Um, yeah, I think that one of the best skills to have is not only the ability to be coached, but the ability to coach yourself, I suppose. Kind of being able to
Yeah,
um, take advice from others, but also be able to know what steps you need to take. I suppose that's what's applicable in both rowing and kind of real life. But
yeah, definitely. Um, I mean, if you can do that, then you can basically do anything.
mm,
I mean, there's just no and now now you really can teach yourself. You can just go on YouTube and there's someone to teach you basically anything that you might want to know.
mm.
Um,
It must have been really weird going from kind of the boat race, kind of like a really kind of peak event, kind of just to kind of not rowing. It just seems mad to me, but you know,
yeah, it wasn't smart. It wasn't the cleverest move, to be honest. In retrospect, it was pretty difficult. It was hard to. I got horrendously out of shape. It was not. It wasn't. Yeah, it really wasn't. It wasn't easy, and that was a mistake. I mean, I just thought, oh, I've done that now. I can kind of live a normal. I can live a normal life. That's not. Unfortunately, that wasn't true. Um, Once you're used to that level of routine and also the sort of being part of a team, to just going off and trying to do things on your own is just very difficult, very
yeah,
difficult.
yeah. I think rowing is a very kind of unique sport, especially at those kind of higher tiers, and kind of it does demand a lot of you both in terms of time and your commitment and kind of who you are. But yeah, think it's cool. Um,
I mean, what's crazy about rowing is how hard just the average rower trains, how much time the average rower puts into things. You compare it to, so now I play on a rugby team, and people get very serious about it. And they get very heated in the games, and it's like when we train pretty hard. When we play, people play the games extremely hard. People are like throwing, they're just like throwing themselves into the tackle, getting injured, and there's always, there's some blood, concussion, whatever, and people get very aggressive. And they also get very upset when things don't go our way. When someone drops a ball or knocks the ball forward or just makes a stupid mistake. Now, from my rowing sort of mindset, it's like, okay, but we train twice a week, so what do you expect?
yeah.
It's like there's no. What do you? Yeah, the average rowing team will train way more than that. Just the bar is just so much higher, and so and I'm kind of saying, well, look, if we want to be really good, let's just train every day. Let's practice. Let's get really fit. Let's practice all the sort of the skills that we need so that we don't drop the ball. But it's just not ingrained. That attitude just isn't ingrained into other sports.
It's really weird because a lot of people who don't do rowing just can't understand like why you would want to. And I don't want to say, well, the reason I train 17 hours a week is because it's better, because they just like can't see that. Like, I can't really argue my point because that kind of makes me look like a typical rower, I suppose. But I think, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I think that the kind of the hours that rowers put in really does kind of bring out that success, and that in other sports you have to get to a really high point in order to do the same kind of the same hours that kind of rowers would do much earlier on. But it's just a different type of thing.
But make no mistake, that's what every professional sports team is doing. That level of training. It's just rowers start at a much lower level. If you're like every top rugby team, football team, well, I mean, and then even obviously tennis, golf, all of these people are training obsessively many hours a day. It's just the average golfer or tennis player just isn't concerned with training that much. Or the school level athlete in some of those sports in general isn't training that much. But that is what it takes to be really good. And there's I can't remember, there was a book or a study talking about 10,000 hours. I don't know whether you've heard of it, where basically to be an expert in anything, you basically have to put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. And so, a lot of these, even these like people who are child prodigies. So even people like Tiger Woods, who was, incredibly good basically as a teenager, he started playing golf when he was like 3 or 4. And so he built up those 10,000 hours just before anybody else. And I think, it applies, in rowing it applies as well. And then it applies in everything else. I think people it just doesn't quite click maybe initially.
Do you think there is such a thing as kind of natural skill? I mean, cast aside kind of physical stuff, but do you think it's purely the hours you put in, or are some people just naturally more just better, I suppose?
People start at different points. I think some people just, I mean, some people can just pick up a ball and they know what to do with it, and then same with rowing. Some people have the right build, and they have maybe like sometimes they have the level of coordination. But once, I think though, after, let's say, a good few years, all of that sort of washes out. Like in your first few years, that can be important, that can make a difference. But if you really want to be good over a lifetime, 10 years, if you're really committed, 20 years, you can basically negate all of that.
Yeah.
But it takes time. I mean, some people do have an advantage. Some people are really, really good. But some people naturally have a really good attitude as well, which is what carries them. Some people just naturally insanely driven. they're not, and often actually the best people, often it's not that they're the biggest or the best naturally. It's just they have this insane mentality that makes them the best.
And now I've got a lot.
I don't know whether you've seen it recently, this documentary on Netflix about Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls. I mean, I really recommend it, but he's a classic example. Some basketball players are 7 foot. Some basketball players are, they have huge muscles. They're quick. They can jump higher. Michael Jordan was physically nowhere near that, and yet he was just. But his mentality was just insane, and that's why he was best of all time.
I think I was watching the film I, Tonya about Tonya Harding, the ice skater. That's a really good film. I like it. But it's like, I think when the determination's there, you can overcome kind of anything you want. And it's like when a sport becomes a kind of really important part of who you are and how you kind of lead your life, it kind of changes how you kind of look at it and how you approach stuff. But yeah, it's very cool. I've got one more question. It's the one I thought of at the last second, and I thought I had to do this. Okay, so the Greek philosopher Plato once said, "For a man to conquer himself is the first and noblest of all victories." What are your thoughts about this?
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, also, beating Cambridge also helps. No, look, that's important. That I think it's what we said at the beginning. If you're just getting better every day, that's kind of all you can do. And I mean, I'm not sure whether that's necessarily what Plato meant, but he could have been talking about all sorts of things. But if you are improving every single day, that's sort of what matters, because you'll get there in the end. And look, I see it. You learn that lesson in rowing because you've got the numbers. It's all about you've got the numbers on the rowing machine in front of you. It takes an enormous amount of discipline and self-control to just sit on that rowing machine for hours on end, in a way that in a way that just that there's just a level of boredom that you just don't have to endure in other sports or games. But yeah, no, I think if you have that in your mind, I think you can't really go wrong.
Yeah, I think that's about it. It's all been really good stuff. So thank you.